He heard her scream, and then her voice snapped, sharp with panic and anger. "Don't look down there. That's off limits." That single line hit Jack Miller harder than the scream itself. He pulled his horse to a dead stop as the sound tore through the Kansas heat. When he crested the low rise outside Dodge City, the land opened into a small stand of cottonwood trees. And there she was, hanging upside down from a thick limb, ankles tied tight with rough rope, wrists bound behind her back. Her dress had fallen to her waist, dust clinging to white fabric that should never have been seen. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Jack froze in the saddle. For a couple of heartbeats, he couldn't look away. Not because he wanted to, but because shock held him still. He hadn't seen a woman like that since the summer his wife was lowered into the ground 8 years ago. Shame burned across the girl's face when she realized where his eyes had gone. "I said don't look," she snapped again, her voice cracking despite the anger. Jack swallowed hard and forced his gaze up to her face. She looked young, maybe early 20s, freckled, sunburned, eyes blazing with humiliation and fury. He swung down fast, boots thudding into dry grass, and pulled his knife free. The rope was crude but tight, meant to hurt. Whoever tied her knew exactly what they were doing. He cut the knot, but he didn't let her drop. Jack caught her steady at the hips and lowered her slowly, careful, like handling something already broken. She stumbled, grabbed her dress, and yanked it back down like cloth could erase what had happened. The ground behind her told the real story. Deep boot marks, drag grass, signs of a struggle that never should have happened. A shadow shifted between the trees. A man stepped forward, the metal star on his chest flashing too bright in the sun. Deputy Frank Dalton smiled like he owned the air she breathed. He held up a folded paper. "She's under arrest," he said calmly. "By order of Dodge City." The girl stiffened beside Jack. "My name's Emily," she said through clenched teeth. Jack read the paper from where he stood. The ink was smeared. The date didn't line up. The signature looked sloppy wrong. His stomach tightened. It was a warrant, but it felt off in every way that mattered. He felt Emily trembling, just barely, as if she was holding herself together out of sheer will. Frank leaned closer, voice dropping. "You saw too much, rancher," he murmured. "Hand her over, or ride home, and forget today ever happened." Jack looked at Emily. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't begging. She was daring him to choose right. He could take her to town and hope the law worked. Or he could handle it here, where no one would see. The prairie went quiet, the kind of silence that came right before trouble. Even the wind seemed to stop. Emily stood close enough that Jack could feel her shaking, and that told him more than any paper ever could. "I've ridden this county 20 years, Jack said evenly, "and I've never seen a proper arrest start with a woman tied upside down." Frank's smile widened. "She resisted," he said. "Tried to run. I tripped," Emily shot back. "He tied me up to scare me." Frank's eyes turned cold. "Careful," he warned. "Talking like that makes things worse." Something shifted in Jack's chest. Not anger yet. Something heavier. The feeling of realizing you'd stayed quiet for too long. He thought of his empty house, of how easy it had been to ride past trouble instead of into it. Frank stepped closer. "You can still walk away." Jack didn't. When Frank reached for Emily's arm, Jack stepped between them. One hand out. Not hitting, just stopping. "Don't," Jack said softly. The word landed hard. Frank's hand hovered, then slid toward his gun. And that was the moment when this stopped being about rules and started being about survival. He kept his hand raised, palm open, like a man calming a nervous horse. Frank Dalton's fingers hovered near the grip of his gun, twitching like they had a mind of their own. Jack didn't move, even though every part of him knew how fast this could turn bad. "You reach for iron," Jack said quietly, "and someone's not walking away from this." Frank let out a short laugh. "That sounds like a threat." Jack shrugged. "No, just the truth." Emily stood behind him, breathing fast. Jack could hear it, sharp and uneven, and it bothered him more than the gun ever could. Frank shifted his stance, trying to angle past Jack, trying to get a clean line to the holster at Jack's hip. Jack matched him step for step, staying in the way like a gate that wouldn't open. Frank's eyes dropped for half a second. That was all it took. The paper in his hand slipped and fluttered toward the ground. Jack's eyes followed it without thinking, and in that blink of distraction, Frank lunged. He slammed his shoulder into Jack's chest, trying to drive him back into Emily. Dust burst up around their boots as Jack stumbled, heels sliding on dry grass. Then muscle memory took over. Jack dug his boots in and shoved back hard. Frank lost balance, his hat flying off his head and spinning into the weeds. Emily gasped, then, without thinking, kicked the fallen hat farther away. It rolled into a thorny patch and disappeared. For a split second, Jack almost smiled. Frank didn't. His face went red with rage. "You little—" He snapped at Emily, swinging his arm toward her. It wasn't a punch. It was worse. A slap meant to remind her of her place. Jack caught Frank's wrist midair. His grip was tight, steady. Frank tried to jerk free and couldn't. His other hand shot toward his gun. That was the real move, the one that ended lives. Jack twisted Frank's wrist inward, fast and sharp. Frank grunted, the sound ugly and animal, and his fingers popped open. The gun stayed in the holster, but the message was clear. Jack could stop him. Frank stumbled back, eyes wide now, something unsure flashing across his face. Then the smile came back, thinner this time. "You just put hands on the law," Frank said. "I'll ruin you for this." Emily stepped up beside Jack, her voice shaking but firm. "You're not the law. You're just wearing a star." Jack looked at Frank and realized something that made his stomach drop. Men like him didn't work alone. Somewhere nearby, hidden in the trees or tall grass, someone else was watching. As if on cue, a soft click came from the cottonwoods. Metal on metal. A rifle being cocked. Frank lifted his chin, smug again. "Easy," he said. "No need to make this ugly." Jack raised one hand, but didn't step aside. "Who's back there?" he asked. A voice answered from the trees, rough and amused. "Just making sure things stay fair." A lean man stepped out, sunburned, holding a long rifle like it weighed nothing. He smiled like this was entertainment. "That's my witness," Frank said. "Sees everything real clear." Emily's fingers dug into Jack's sleeve. He leaned just enough to whisper, "When I say run, you run. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," she whispered. Jack gave a small, sad smile. Frank cleared his throat. "Enough of this." Hands behind her back. "Rancher." Jack took a slow step forward instead. The rifleman shifted his grip. Time stretched thin. Emily screamed, not in fear, but in warning. The rifleman's finger slid inside the trigger guard. Jack moved. He grabbed Emily and dragged her down as the shot cracked through the trees. Wood splintered above them. Birds exploded into the sky. Jack rolled, came up on one knee, and his hand found his pistol without thought. The gun barked once. The rifleman screamed, clutching his hand as the weapon dropped into the dirt. Blood flashed red against the dust before the man vanished into the brush, running blind with pain and panic. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then hooves thundered in the distance. More than one horse. Coming fast. Jack kept his eyes on Frank as the sound grew louder. "Your friends heard that, didn't they?" Frank didn't answer. He didn't have to. Jack drove him face first into the dirt, ripped the star from his chest, crushed it in his fist, and tossed it into the weeds. "Tell the truth in town," Jack said low, "or I will." He turned to Emily. "Get up. Now." They mounted the horse in one smooth, desperate motion as angry voices carried on the wind behind them. Jack kicked hard, and the horse surged forward toward Dodge City, dust rising like a storm that already knew their names. Jack didn't slow the horse until the cottonwoods were far behind them, and the open prairie stretched wide again. The wind burned his eyes, but he didn't blink. Emily's arms were wrapped tight around his waist, her forehead pressed in his back like she was afraid the world might disappear if she let go. Her hands were shaking. He could feel it through his coat. "Breathe," he said, not turning around. "Slow. You're safe for the moment." "For the moment," she repeated softly, like she didn't quite believe it. The horse's muscles rolled under them, strong and steady, and Jack focused on that rhythm. He needed something solid to hold on to. Behind them, the sound of pursuit faded, but the silence that replaced it felt heavier, the kind that left too much room for thought. "I thought I was going to die out there," Emily said after a while. Her voice was small now, nothing like the sharp anger from before. When he tied the rope, I kept thinking no one was coming. I kept thinking this was it. Jack swallowed. He had no good answer. So he told the truth. I'm sorry I didn't get there sooner. She let out a shaky breath that almost sounded like a laugh. You came at all. That counts. They rode a few more minutes in quiet. Then Emily's grip loosened just enough for her to sit up straighter. She pulled the torn edge of her dress down again, even though Jack had already angled his body to shield her from anyone who might see them from a distance. Thank you, she said, for not pretending you didn't see. That one landed deeper than she probably meant it to. Jack felt something twist in his chest. He hadn't pretended, but he had done that plenty of other times in his life. Looked away, kept writing, told himself it wasn't his business. 8 years of that since his wife died. 8 quiet, careful years. What he did wasn't your fault, Jack said. Not a bit of it. Emily nodded, but her eyes stayed on the horizon. He said no one would believe me. Said a badge mattered more than my word. Jack breathed out through his nose. Sometimes it does, he said. That doesn't make it right. The first buildings of Dodge City finally came into view, small shapes rising out of the dust. Jack felt his stomach tighten instead of ease. Town meant people. People meant stories. And stories didn't always land where they should. What if they catch us before we get there? Emily asked. Then we don't let them take you, Jack said without hesitation. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, softer, I didn't even tell you my name. I heard him say it, Jack replied. Emily. She managed a weak smile. And you're Jack. He nodded. Jack Miller. Another stretch of silence passed. The town grew closer. Jack could see heads turning now, figures on porches pausing mid-conversation. Emily's shoulders hunched, shame trying to crawl back over her like a blanket. Jack shifted in the saddle and angled himself again, blocking her from their stares. Keep your chin up, he said quietly. You didn't do wrong. She drew a breath and lifted her head. At the edge of town, a man near a hitching rail muttered, That deputy again? Jack's eyes snapped toward him. Where's the sheriff? He asked. The man pointed down the street. Office should be open. Emily leaned closer. Do you think they'll believe us? Jack stared straight ahead. I don't know, he said. But I know what happens when decent people stay quiet. He'd seen it before. On lonely trails. In small towns that learned to look away. A bully got braver. Everyone else got tired. If they don't, Emily said, voice shaking, I'm finished. Jack turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. Then I'll stand with you anyway. That was the real line he'd crossed. Not the fight. Not the gunshot. The choice to stop being quiet. They rode into Dodge City not fearless, but done being pushed. The street felt narrower than it should have, like the buildings had leaned in to watch them arrive. Jack slowed the horse to a walk. Boots scraped against wooden planks. Conversations dropped into uneasy silence. Emily kept her hands folded tight in her lap, knuckles pale, eyes forward. Jack could feel her trying to make herself smaller. He hated that. A man stepped out from the sheriff's office, older, heavier, with a face that looked worn down by years of bad news. Sheriff Tom Harris squinted at them, then at Emily's torn dress, then at Jack's hard expression. Jack Miller, Harris said. Didn't expect to see you riding in like this. Jack swung down first, then helped Emily off the horse. He didn't rush her. He didn't let go until her boots were steady on the ground. We need to talk, Jack said, privately. Harris studied him for a moment longer, then nodded and held the door open. Inside, the air smelled like ink and old wood. Emily hesitated on the threshold. Jack waited. When she finally stepped in, he stayed close enough that she could feel him there. What happened? Harris asked. Emily tried to speak and couldn't. Her throat worked, but no sound came out. Jack saw her eyes glaze, just a little, the way people looked when they were back somewhere they didn't want to be. He tied her to a tree, Jack said gently. Upside down. Harris's jaw tightened. Who? Deputy Frank Dalton. The name landed heavy in the room. Emily swallowed and forced herself to talk. He said I was under arrest. The paper was wrong. He scared me. He said no one would care. Harris leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. That's a serious accusation. Jack nodded. I know. And you shot a man, Harris added. Jack didn't dodge it. I shot his hand. He was about to fire. The sheriff was quiet for a long time. Outside, voices rose and fell as people gathered without meaning to. Trouble always drew a crowd. I've had complaints about Frank, Harris finally said. Nothing I could prove. Emily's shoulders sagged at that, like hope leaking out of her. Jack saw it and stepped closer. You can prove this, Jack said. There were tracks, road marks, a witness with a rifle. Harris looked at Emily. Really looked this time. You willing to swear to it? Her lips trembled. If I don't, she said softly, he'll do it to someone else. That settled something in the room. Harris stood. Sit tight, he said. Both of you. Minutes stretched. Jack felt every one of them. He thought about his wife again, about the day he'd stayed quiet because he didn't want trouble, about how easy silence had been, and how heavy it felt now. Boots sounded outside. Angry voices. Frank Dalton shouting his version of the story before anyone even asked. Harris returned with 2 deputies who looked uncomfortable but alert. Frank's been relieved of duty, Harris said. For now. Emily exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and exhaustion. Her knees buckled, and Jack caught her before she hit the floor. He guided her into a chair, his hand steady on her shoulder. I'm tired, she whispered, ashamed of it. That's allowed, Jack said. You survived. Outside, Frank was still shouting. Inside, Harris watched Jack with a new look in his eyes. You knew this would turn your life upside down, the sheriff said. Jack nodded. Yeah. You regret it? Jack glanced at Emily, at the way she was finally breathing a little easier. No, he said. I regret not doing it sooner. The door creaked as Harris went back outside to face the noise. Jack stayed where he was, standing between Emily and whatever came next, knowing the hardest part wasn't over yet. The shouting outside didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder, Messier. Jack could hear Frank's voice cutting through the crowd, sharp with anger and fear both. Men like him always talked loud when the ground started slipping under their feet. Emily sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor like it might give her answers. Jack noticed the way her shoulders were still tight, like she expected someone to grab her again if she relaxed even a little. You don't have to be brave right now, Jack said quietly. No one's asking that of you. She nodded, but didn't look up. I don't feel brave, she said. I feel stupid. I keep thinking, maybe I should have just done what he said. Maybe then this would be over. Jack crouched, so he was closer to her level. That's what fear does, he said. It lies. Makes you think obedience would have saved you. It wouldn't have. Her eyes finally lifted to his, glassy and red. How do you know? Because men like that don't stop, Jack said. They just get quieter about it. Outside, a woman's voice rose, angry now. Someone else shouted back. The sound of Dodge City, choosing sides, filled the air, and Jack felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just Emily's fight anymore. It was his too, whether he liked it or not. The door opened, and Sheriff Harris stepped back in, closing it behind him like he needed a moment away from the noise. His face looked older than it had an hour ago. Town split, he said plainly. Some folks want Frank locked up. Others say he's been wearing a badge too long to be lying. Emily's mouth tightened. And what do you think? Harris didn't answer right away. He looked at Jack instead. I think you made enemies today. Jack nodded once. I figured. Harris sighed. There's going to be a hearing. Statements. Questions that feel like knives. You ready for that? Emily's hands started shaking again. Jack answered before she could. She won't face it alone. Harris studied him for a long moment. You sure about that? Standing with her means folks will come after you. Business. Friends. Your quiet life. Jack felt something settle in his chest, solid and heavy. My quiet life wasn't worth much, he said. Not if this is the price of it. Emily's breath hitched. She reached out without thinking and gripped the sleeve of his coat. Not tight, just enough to know he was real. I don't even know what happens next, she said. Jack softened his voice. Next, you rest. Then you tell the truth. That's all anyone can do. Harris nodded slowly. I'll send for a woman from the boarding house. She'll look after you tonight. Emily hesitated. Can Jack stay? The sheriff raised an eyebrow. Jack opened his mouth to object, but Harris waved it off. He's already in this deep. When Harris left again, The room felt smaller but calmer. Emily leaned back in the chair, exhaustion finally winning. Jack stayed standing, watching the door, listening to the town argue itself raw. "You didn't have to do this," she murmured. Jack looked down at her. "Yes," he said. "I did." She frowned slightly. "Why?" Jack thought of the empty house, of 8 years of silence, of the scream that had cut through the heat and into him. "Because I didn't want to be the kind of man who rode past," he said. Emily closed her eyes, tears slipping free at last. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. Jack stayed there, guarding the space between her and the world, knowing tomorrow would be harder, knowing the town might still choose the badge over the truth. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something close to peace. Night came slow, like the town itself was unsure whether to settle down or stay restless. A lamp was lit in the corner of the office, throwing soft light across the walls. Emily slept sitting up at first, head tilted awkwardly, until Jack gently shifted a folded coat behind her back. She stirred but didn't wake. Her face, relaxed now, looked younger, tired, human in a way fear hadn't allowed before. Jack sat on a wooden chair near the door, hat in his hands. He kept turning it over, thumb tracing the worn edge of the brim. Outside, boots passed, voices dropped low when they crossed the door, then rose again once they moved on. Dodge City was talking, and he knew once a town started talking, it didn't stop easy. He thought about how close he'd come to dying that afternoon, about how fast his hand had gone to the gun without his mind catching up. That part scared him more than Frank Dalton ever could. He had lived careful for years, quiet, predictable, and still here he was. The door opened softly. Sheriff Harris stepped in, slower now, like the day had finally caught up to him. "She's sleeping?" Harris asked. Jack nodded. "For now." Harris leaned against the desk. "Frank's in a cell. Not happy about it. I didn't expect him to be." Harris gave a tired half-smile that didn't last. "People are already choosing sides. Some of them are friends of yours." Jack felt that, but he didn't flinch. Friends who'd rather protect a lie weren't much use to begin with. Harris studied him. "You always talk like this." "No," Jack said. "Just today." That earned a quiet breath of a laugh from the sheriff. Then his face turned serious again. "Tomorrow won't be kind. They'll question everything. Why you were there. Why you didn't walk away." Jack looked at Emily. "Because sometimes walking away is the worst thing you can do." Harris nodded once. "Get some rest. Both of you." When he left, the silence returned, heavier but calmer. Emily shifted and opened her eyes, blinking like she wasn't sure where she was. "Did I miss anything?" she whispered. "Just the town arguing with itself," Jack said. She tried to sit up straighter and winced. Jack moved without thinking, steadying her. "I hate that I feel weak," she said. Jack shook his head. "You're not weak. You're worn down. There's a difference." She studied him in the lamplight. "You really meant it, didn't you? About standing with me." He met her gaze. Every word. Emily nodded slowly, like she was letting that truth settle somewhere deep. "No one's ever done that for me before." Jack didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet. This time, the silence felt right. Outside, the noise finally faded. The town went to sleep uneasy, like it knew morning would bring something it couldn't ignore anymore. Jack leaned back in the chair, eyes open, keeping watch. He wasn't guarding against Frank Dalton now. Morning came with no mercy. The sun rose clean and bright, like nothing bad had ever happened the day before. Jack had not slept. He'd only rested his eyes now and then, listening to the town wake up. Wagons creaked. A bell rang somewhere down the street. Life went on, same as always. That felt wrong. Emily woke slowly, blinking at the light, then stiffened when memory came rushing back. Jack saw it in her shoulders before she spoke. "It wasn't a dream," she said. "No," Jack replied. "But you're still standing." She sat up, smoothing her dress, embarrassed again by the tear, by the way the fabric no longer felt like protection. Jack turned his body without thinking, giving her space. He learned that some care didn't need words. Sheriff Harris returned not long after, face set, jaw tight. "It's time," he said. "People are gathering." Emily's hands started to shake. She clasped them together, then stopped and forced them apart, like she refused to let fear win that small victory. Jack noticed. He always noticed now. Outside, the street was full. Not packed, but full enough to feel heavy. Faces turned as they stepped out. Some curious, some angry, some already decided. Frank Dalton stood near the office steps, jaw bruised, eyes sharp. The cell hadn't humbled him. It had only made him louder. "There she is," Frank called. Dragged a good man's name through the dirt. Emily flinched. Jack stepped forward just enough that Frank's eyes met his instead. "You had your turn yesterday," Jack said. "Now it's hers." Murmurs rolled through the crowd. Sheriff Harris raised his voice, steady but strained, and asked for quiet. It didn't fully come, but it softened. Emily spoke slowly. Her voice shook at first, then steadied as the truth found its footing. She told them about the rope, the threats, the laughter that hadn't sounded like laughter at all. She didn't dress it up. She didn't beg. She just told it straight. Jack watched the crowd while she spoke. He saw doubt fade from some faces, harden in others. He saw a woman near the back press her lips tight, like she was remembering something she'd never said out loud. When Emily finished, the silence was different than before. Heavier, thoughtful. Frank scoffed. "Stories," he said. "A rancher and a girl trying to save face." Jack stepped forward again. "Then explain the rope marks," he said. "The tracks. The witness you brought with a rifle." Frank opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes flicked sideways. That was enough. Sheriff Harris nodded to his deputies. "Frank Dalton," he said, "you're done wearing that star." The words didn't come with drama, just finality. Emily's knees nearly gave out. Jack caught her, steady as ever. She leaned into him this time, not out of fear, but relief so sharp it hurt. The crowd began to thin. Some left quiet, others angry. But something had shifted. A lie had been dragged into daylight, and daylight had done what it always did. Emily looked up at Jack. Her eyes were clearer now, stronger. "What happens now?" she asked. Jack thought about it, about the cost, about the quiet life he'd lost. "Now," he said, "we live with the truth." The town settled slowly after that. Not all at once. Not cleanly. Truth rarely worked that way. Some people avoided Jack's eyes when he passed. Others nodded, quiet and respectful. Dodge City didn't turn into something better overnight, but it cracked just enough to let light in. Emily stayed at the boarding house for a few days. She slept long hours, the kind of sleep that came after fear finally loosened its grip. Jack checked on her once a day, never pushing, never acting like he owned her safety. He just showed up. That mattered more than big promises. One evening, she met him outside, the sun low and soft. Her dress was mended. Her hair was brushed back. She still looked tired, but there was steadiness in her now. "I'm leaving town," she said. Jack felt that tug in his chest again, the one he didn't name. "That sounds like a good plan." "I used to think leaving meant I lost," she said. "Now I think it means I get to choose." Jack nodded. "That's the right kind of leaving." They stood there a moment, not rushing it. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing once. "You didn't save me," she said. "You just didn't look away." Jack swallowed. Turns out that's enough sometimes. When she rode out the next morning, no one tried to stop her. A few people watched. A few pretended not to. Jack stood by the hitching rail until she disappeared down the road. Life didn't get easier after that, but it got clearer. Jack went back to his ranch. The house was still quiet, still missing his wife, still full of old ghosts. But the silence felt different now. Lighter, like it wasn't hiding something anymore. He understood the lesson at last. Not the one people like to say out loud, but the real one. Evil didn't win because it was strong. It won because good people stayed comfortable, stayed quiet, stayed busy. Jack had stayed quiet for 8 years. He wouldn't do it again, and that was enough to let him sleep.